When you hear the name Sun Tzu, what comes to mind? Battlefield strategies, generals, strategy quotes shared by entrepreneurs who have never actually read the book. He is presented as a philosopher of victory, a mystical thinker who unlocked the hidden psychology of conflict. But none of what comes to mind truly captures who he was. Because when you strip away the slogans and the mythology, when you understand what Sun Tzu actually wrote, you discover something far more interesting than a warrior's manual. Sun Tzu did not aim to win wars. He aimed to avoid them. He was not interested in glory, in dominance, or in conflict itself. He was interested in one thing above all else: cost. And in a world bleeding itself dry through endless warfare, Sun Tzu became the first thinker in history to make one truth uncomfortably clear. The greatest danger to a state is not the enemy standing before you. It is the bill that arrives after the fighting stops. If people think the art of war is about fighting, it is really about finance. To understand Sun Tzu's financial genius, you have to understand the world that produced him. Because his ideas did not appear out of nowhere. They were not born in quiet contemplation. They were forged in a world collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. China during the late spring and autumn period in the early Warring States era, roughly the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, was a landscape of fractured kingdoms, each convinced it could unify the world, each draining its treasury to try. War was not occasional. It was constant. Alliances formed and shattered within a single generation. Armies grew larger every decade. The aristocratic chariot duel had given way to massive infantry mobilizations requiring food, metal, supply lines, and taxation at a scale no previous generation could have imagined. States were not just fighting battles. They were conducting full-scale stress tests of their own economies. Every time a king sent an army into the field, he was taking out a loan against his future. And far too often those loans came due in ways that destroyed him. A campaign lasting more than a few months could bankrupt a smaller state. A campaign lasting more than a year could collapse a larger one. And because these kingdoms were trapped in a cycle of mutual insecurity, they kept fighting anyway. This was an arms race before the modern world invented the term. And it was straining the entire political system to its breaking point. Sun Tzu walked into this world, not as a philosopher, but as a strategist forced to solve an economic crisis that had disguised itself as a military problem. In the West, we romanticize him as an ancient leadership guru, but in reality, he was closer to a risk manager. He looked at the numbers, the costs, the timelines, the logistics, and reached a conclusion that no one around him wanted to hear. The way states were conducting war could not be sustained. If the money ran out, victory on the battlefield meant nothing. And most rulers never understood this. They believed winning the war was what mattered most. Sun Tzu believed their own spending was the real threat. That is why the most important line in the art of war appears at the very beginning, long before Sun Tzu ever discusses deception, terrain, or morale. He says, "War is of vital importance to the state, not glorious, not honorable, vital, meaning dangerous, meaning disruptive, meaning capable of destroying the very society it claims to defend." He spends the rest of the book explaining how to keep war contained, limited, and financially restrained as much as possible. And in doing so, he reveals his true obsession: minimizing financial risk. Even his most famous ideas turn out to be economic principles wearing philosophical clothing. When he says the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, this is not mysticism. This is cost avoidance. It is the ancient equivalent of reaching the outcome you need without burning capital to get there. When he warns that no nation has ever benefited from prolonged warfare, he is stating a literal fiscal truth. The longer a campaign continues, the more it erodes the state's capacity to function, to collect taxes, to maintain order. When he emphasizes speed, intelligence gathering, deception, and psychological pressure, it is because these tools are dramatically cheaper than armies. Sun Tzu was not trying to win battles. He was trying to prevent states from bankrupting themselves while attempting to win battles. To understand how revolutionary this thinking was, you have to understand what Chinese warfare looked like before him. For centuries, aristocratic elites had fought ritualized conflicts where honor mattered more than outcomes, and economic cost barely entered the discussion. War was theater. Expensive, sometimes deadly, but theater nonetheless. But as populations grew and weapons changed, war transformed into something unrecognizable. States began standardizing coinage, reforming tax systems, and building bureaucracies just to keep their armies in the field. Fighting became a national project and an existential financial risk at the same time. Sun Tzu saw that the old mindset had become suicidal. War could no longer be treated as a stage for noble gestures or symbolic victories. It had become a budgetary threat requiring cold, unsentimental analysis. This is why Sun Tzu is an anomaly in world military history. While most military thinkers glorified combat, he treated war as a balance sheet. He calculated supply chains, resource depletion, and opportunity cost centuries before those terms existed in any language. He had no patience for generals who chase glory at the expense of stability, because he understood a truth that modern leaders still struggle to internalize. Every decision made on the battlefield is ultimately a decision about national solvency. If you miscalculate, you do not just lose soldiers. You lose the state itself. When you read The Art of War, through this economic lens, the book stops sounding like ancient poetry and starts sounding like a risk assessment document. Sun Tzu opens his treatise by listing the 5 fundamental factors that determine the outcome of war. And buried beneath the philosophical language is a simple truth. These are cost variables: moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline. He is not speaking in abstractions. He is asking, what does this war actually require? How stable is your state? How resilient is your population? How efficiently can your army move? How disciplined is your administration under financial strain? He is conducting a structured risk assessment long before that phrase existed in any language. And from the very first page, he makes clear that leaders who cannot calculate cost have no business calculating strategy. That is why so much of the book concerns logistics rather than heroics. Sun Tzu devotes an entire section to the economics of feeding an army. The logic is precise and brutal. Distance increases cost. Prolonged distance multiplies it exponentially. Transporting supplies drains the treasury faster than paying troops. Keeping an army in the field collapses the agricultural labor base. Wasteful commanders bankrupt their nations while winning meaningless skirmishes. For a military treatise, it is strangely uninterested in battle, and obsessively interested in how much the battle costs. He instructs rulers to use the enemy's resources whenever possible, not as a tactical convenience, as a fiscal necessity. He condemns leaders who prolong campaigns not because they lack decisiveness, but because they are financially reckless. Sun Tzu understood something that modern states repeatedly forget. Logistics do not support strategy. Logistics are strategy. His approach to intelligence reveals the same financial logic operating at a different level. Today, when governments debate surveillance budgets, the discussion is framed in terms of security, ethics, or national interest. Sun Tzu framed it in terms of cost efficiency. A single spy, he explains, can prevent an entire army from marching in the wrong direction. A single intercepted message can save a nation more than a military campaign costs. He writes that what enables the wise sovereign and the good general to achieve things beyond the reach of ordinary men is foreknowledge. Foreknowledge is simply the ancient world's word for data. Sun Tzu saw information not as an accessory to warfare, but as the cheapest and most effective weapon available. Sending soldiers where intelligence would have sufficed is not bravery, it is waste. His emphasis on speed operates on the same financial foundation. Speed is the essence of war, he writes. Most readers interpret this as a call for aggressive action, but Sun Tzu's real meaning is subtler and more important. Speed lowers cost. Every day an army spends marching, feeding, and waiting increases financial exposure. Victory delayed is money burned. Victory won through maneuver instead of attrition preserves resources for the next threat, the next crisis, the next challenge. Sun Tzu's preference for flexibility, adaptability, and psychological advantage is not philosophical flourish. It is fiscal discipline speaking the language of strategy. But his deepest financial insight is woven into the entire structure of the book. Every line is about opportunity cost. Every choice a ruler makes closes the door to a cheaper alternative. Every battle fought is a battle that could have been won through less costly means. Sun Tzu does not oppose war. He opposes waste. And the ultimate waste, in his view, is fighting battles you did not have to fight. That is why he praises generals who break resistance without bloodshed, who win through diplomacy, intimidation, misdirection, or strategic alliances. To Sun Tzu, these are not secondary strategies. They are the primary strategies, because they preserve the state's limited capital for challenges that cannot be avoided. In one of his most revealing passages, he warns that rulers who enjoy warfare for its own sake will bring ruin upon their kingdoms. Behind the poetic language lies a cold accounting principle. If you treat war as a passion instead of a liability, you will eventually default. What makes Sun Tzu's financial genius undeniable is not the theory. It is what happened to the states around him that ignored it. Some kingdoms poured their wealth into drawn-out sieges that drained their tax base and left them vulnerable to internal rebellion. Others applied Sun Tzu's logic, using information, alliances, and rapid strikes to avoid the economic spiral that prolonged conflict always produces. The states that treated war as a financial instrument, wielded sparingly and strategically, survived longer. They built stronger institutions. The states that treated war as a test of honor or a demonstration of power were destroyed, often at the very moment of their apparent greatest triumph. Sun Tzu was not only right in theory, history proved him right repeatedly in practice. And this is where the story moves beyond ancient China and becomes something far more immediate. Because Sun Tzu's warnings have echoed through every major conflict of the last 2 centuries. And modern governments have continued making the same mistake he spent his entire career trying to prevent. They enter wars without calculating the long-term economic strain. They confuse military capability with financial sustainability, and then they watch their budgets fracture. The Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, the European imperial powers in the First World War. These conflicts were not lost because the armies were weak. They were lost because the economic model behind them collapsed. Sun Tzu would have recognized the pattern instantly. He had documented it centuries earlier. Prolonged warfare erodes the state faster than the enemy ever could. Meanwhile, the tools he championed have become the backbone of modern strategic competition precisely because they are cheaper. Cyber warfare is Sun Tzu. Sanctions are Sun Tzu. Proxy wars, covert influence campaigns, strategic deterrence. All of them aim to achieve maximum effect with minimum financial exposure. The world's most powerful states, however much they may deny it, still live inside Sun Tzu's balance sheet. The deepest lesson, the one most people miss entirely, is this. Sun Tzu was not teaching rulers how to win wars. He was teaching them how to avoid national bankruptcy. His true genius was understanding that the cost of conflict outlives the conflict itself. That states do not fail because they lose battles. They fail because they drain the capital that keeps them coherent, stable, and functional across time. In Sun Tzu's world, victory is meaningless if the treasury is empty when it arrives. The best war is the one that does not require repairing your economy when it is over. And when the art of war is read through this lens, it becomes something entirely different from what most people imagine. It is not a book about courage or aggression. It is a book about restraint. It is not about crushing opponents. It is about outlasting them. It does not glorify the triumph of conquest, it glorifies the discipline of preservation. Sun Tzu does not glorify victory, he glorifies stability. The ruler who preserves resources is wiser than the ruler who conquers cities. The general who wins without fighting is wiser than the general who destroys armies. The state that knows when not to act is stronger than the one that acts out of pride or the desire for reputation. Sun Tzu's philosophy is not the philosophy of a warrior. It is the philosophy of a steward, someone responsible for maintaining the long-term solvency of a civilization across generations through crises not yet arrived, against enemies not yet revealed. In the end, Sun Tzu's financial genius lies in his refusal to separate economics from power. He understood that the two are inseparable, that war is merely the most expensive policy decision a state can make, and that the ruler who miscalculates its cost does not simply lose a campaign. He signs his own death warrant. The message is simple, unsettling, and as relevant today as it was 25 centuries ago. Power is not measured by how hard you strike. It is measured by how much you can afford to strike, how long you can keep striking, and how much remains when the striking is done. History shows that when financial systems collide, it is not the bravest nation that prevails. It is the most economically disciplined. If you're curious about the dark and unlit corners of history that powerful forces have long tried to keep hidden, do not forget to subscribe.